Sixth grade, welcome to science on a Wednesday. We're cruising along through our chapter. Yesterday we talked about asexual reproduction and we talked about heredity. We'll start with a review of heredity, in other words, what makes you you. We talked about three major things that all work together to make you the unique individual that you are. One, your heredity. What did you inherit from your parents? Their DNA that was passed to you. Two, the environment. How is where you grew up and things that came from that affecting your development. And then three is what we call learned traits. You have to learn on your own. They cannot be passed from your parents down to that. So lots of times you'll be good at math and your parents will say, I was really good at math. And you think, well, I was just born good at math. No, you were born with the ability to learn math, but you still have to learn it. You still have to work at it and practice those skills. Without practice, you won't have those things. Then we moved on yesterday to talk about asexual reproduction. Remember, asexual means one. So it's from one parent. Because it's all from one parent, guys, the DNA will be exact from parent down to the next generation of the offspring. So they'll have exact DNA. And we talked about the different types that there were, from body parts like sea stars and potatoes, to budding like hydra that just drops a little piece of it off and it can grow, to spores in your molds, to fission in your bacteria. Fission is splitting. Spores is dropping like little seeds, but they're not considered seeds that go along with it. Okay, lesson 2 today, guys, we're going to talk about these traits. So back to yesterday, heredity. Today we're going to learn how does heredity actually get passed down to the next generation, and we'll spend a couple days talking about this. The summary: the instructions for an organism's traits can be found in its DNA. The structure of DNA makes it possible for organisms to pass traits on to their offspring. So today we're going to learn about the DNA, and then we'll spend a lesson talking about how we actually pass that on. You have your notes sitting over here. Here we go. When new organisms result from asexual reproduction, why do the two new cells share the same traits? The answer is in the nucleus of the parent cell. For most organisms, a cell nucleus contains its chromosomes. Chromosomes contain a set of instructions that control all activities of a cell. I'm going to pause there right now. Guys, it says for most organisms, because if you remember chapter 1, there are certain organisms, living things out there, that do not have a nucleus. And so that's why they have to say in most organisms, not in all of those things. You got your fill in the blank for number 1. These instructions tell individual cell parts what to do. They also tell cells in multicellular organisms how to work together to form an individual organism. For example, the chromosomes in each cell of a gorilla contains all the instructions to make a gorilla. Chromosomes are made up of protein and DNA. DNA is short for dioxyribonucleic acid. Dioxyribonucleic acid. If you see in here, guys, this is the ribosomes that we talked about in chapter 2 to go along with those things. Obviously, a big, huge, fancy word that I'm struggling to pronounce. It's why we call it DNA today. Okay. Proteins is what ribosomes make, the base of those things. The DNA strands in chromosomes are tightly coiled. If you were able to stretch out the 46, that's number 3, guys. A human cell has 46 chromosomes. Smash that into your head. We're going to talk about that a lot. In a single human cell, and lay these things end to end like this. The strand would be about 2 meters long. That's about 6 feet tall. Although the strands are long, they're very thin. Guys, please understand this next thing. Even under a microscope, you can't see the chromosomes in most cells except during cell division. So I can't even see the big chromosome here. Then if I take that chromosome and I unwind it like this would be 2 meters long. And that is all wound into something that's microscopic that even with today's powerful microscopes I can't see. So when they talk about very thin, guys, make sure you're not thinking, well, a piece of paper is thin. Make sure you're thinking microscopically thin, but interestingly how long it is. Other times the DNA and the proteins that make up chromosomes are spread throughout the nucleus, and so we can't see it. Scientists have been able to see chromosomes for more than 100 years, but until the 1950s, no one understood the importance of DNA. Around that time, though, the work of several scientists were used to show that DNA carries all the instructions for a cell. Their work also showed that DNA is passed from a parent cell to its offspring. So in the 50s, scientists showed that DNA is passed from parent down to offspring. They keep using the word offspring, guys, because that applies to all living things. You and I would say from parent down to child, but that's only with humans. Normally we think about it that way. So this is plants do this, animals do this, bacteria do this, parent to offspring. That's why they're using that word. In 1953, two scientists, James Watson and Francis Crick, described the structure of DNA. To do this, they used an X-ray photographs made by Rosalind Franklin, an English chemist. If you remember Monday, guys, we started this chapter with her picture and paragraph about her, and in that little story about her, it mentioned these two guys, Watson and Crick. If you look at a strand of DNA, you would see that it looks like a twisted ladder. Okay, so you got Rosalind Franklin here, you got twisted ladder here. This ladder contains millions of rungs. These rungs are made up of only 4 kinds of materials, which are called bases. So you're filling in the blank through number 6. These bases are known by the letters A, T, C, and G. Each rung is made up of 2 bases, which we then call base pairs. You'll get this in a second, but I just wrote it for you already. So I only have 4 choices. The letter A always and only goes with the letter T. C always and only goes with the letter G. That's super important, okay? So you get all these base pairs. You can see that green and orange in their coloring is always going together, and blue and purple are always going together. There's no other way around that. And as we unwrap DNA, guys, these little lines, it's literally millions and millions and millions of those that will make up a gene, which is a piece of this DNA, and then you put that inside a chromosome. All right, the DNA of a chromosome is divided into sections called genes. A gene, number 7, is a series of base pairs or rungs. The number of rungs varies from gene to gene. One known gene has over 2 million rungs. So I'm just going to make this up, but I'm going to say, to give you your eye color, we put 2 million of these base pairs together, and depending on how the A, T, C, G's all go in that 2 million, will decide if your eyes are blue, brown, hazel, on and on and on and on. Now, that's not the gene they're talking about, guys, but it's just giving you an idea of, I have a gene for everything. How tall am I going to be, dimples, no dimples, straight teeth, crooked teeth, eye color, right on down the list, guys. Those are all the genes, the little pieces from each chromosome. Each gene controls what substance the cell makes and when it makes them. These substances determine an organism's trait. For example, the gene in the cells of a rose determine the plant's flower color by telling the flower to produce the pigment to make. Okay, over here. This is an important question. It'll be on your test. Members of the same species have the same number of chromosomes, so humans have 46. That's because each species has its own unique number of chromosomes. As you can see from the picture, the number of chromosomes that each cell of a species has tells you nothing about the size of the individual. I also put over here, guys, when you're filling in these blanks, the number of chromosomes of each species tells you nothing about the size. I also wrote, or their complexity. In other words, I look at humans and say, we are a very complex creature. We can talk, we can move, we can do so many things that plants and other things can't do. It has nothing to do with the number of chromosomes. So they gave you 3 chromosomes. They gave you the gorilla that has 48, which is 2 more than a human, but humans are, in my mind, more advanced than gorillas. But then they moved down to crayfish, obviously much smaller than a gorilla, and yet has 200 chromosomes. And then they moved down to this horsetail, which has 216 chromosomes, and it's just a plant. And so what they're saying is the number of chromosomes, absolutely nothing to do with size, shape, anything, guys. God in his wisdom gave them different number of chromosomes. Why he did that, I don't have a clue. Okay. In lesson 3, we'll learn why the numbers are always even, though. They have to be even so they can get divided in half. All right, let's figure out how we get this DNA. You should be ready to roll on Number 9, the DNA of all living things is made up of pairs of the same 4 bases. They stress that to you again. Notice in the diagram that the order of the base pairs varies from place to place on the DNA ladder. The order determines exactly what instructions each gene gives to an organism's cells. For example, an arrangement of TA, CG to GC to TA will give different instructions than an arrangement of TA. Oh, now they switched the letters. Now you have AT instead of CG. Okay, so they switch this one out with that one, and it's going to give you something different. Different organisms have different arrangement of base pairs. Okay, so there's your number 9. That's what makes the organisms different. 2 bases fit together to form each rung, but they fit together only in a certain way. Here's where you had your notes for number 6. Base T can only pair with base A, and base G and C can only pair with each other. This pairing allows DNA to make an exact copy of itself when the cell divides through mitosis. Let's figure out how this works. I'll read it here first, and then you'll see how it's the same there. So here's how it works. Before the cell divides, the base pairs pull apart. One base stays attached to each side. So I have this ladder, and the ladder breaks apart like it's doing there. So now I have this not twisted ladder anymore, but one straight strand line. Now, extra bases are floating around inside your nucleus. So we have these random base pairs that are just floating around. Those base pairs then join the bases to attach to an A. But remember, guys, they can only attach a certain way. So you see how on this picture they have a curved edge here? Well, that will take that curved edge. So yellow broke from green, and now this green can attach to this yellow, and this yellow floating here can attach to this green. Same thing here where you have the jagged points. We'll find a free-floating blue to attach to the purple, and a free-floating purple, pink, whatever you call that, to attach to this blue. That's what's happening. Because each pair only pairs only with one other kind of base, we will now form 2 strands that are identical to each other. So after they pull apart, they reattach with new free-floating, and then you're going to have the exact copy of those things going on. In paragraph form, it looks like this. When a cell undergoes mitosis, its DNA unzips. The base pairs come apart. Free-floating bases within the cell's nucleus pair with the separated bases on the DNA strand. The process continues until 2 complete double strands of DNA are formed. The 2 strands are identical to the original. In this way, an organism that reproduces asexually gives exact copies of its genes to each new cell. Tragically, that doesn't always work that way. Sometimes an error occurs, and a strand of DNA does not make an exact copy of itself. A base might be added, or, fill in your blank on number 11, deleted. Or, another way it can happen is one base pair replaces another one. So it was supposed to be CG, and instead it turned into AT for some reason. That's what happens. This is called, the last blank in your number 11, a mutation. A mutation can change the instructions a gene sends. Sometimes a changed gene is passed on to an organism's offspring. So that's number 12, guys. So sometimes a mutation goes wrong and a human being gets this, we might think of it as a disease. It's a mutation. They have an example of it here, guys. This is albino, an albino camel. So what happened is the coloring, something changed in that gene. There was a mutation, and so what's supposed to produce a pigment doesn't. So it comes out completely bleach white like this. It also has red eyes. That's what albino does. Gives an animal red eyes and white fur skin. Humans can be albinos as well. You'll see these animals every once in a while. My sister just sent me a picture in Minnesota. She has an albino squirrel that's in her neighborhood. So many times, guys, things like that in the animal kingdom, they won't live that long because they don't have their camouflage. A white squirrel sticks out really bad, and the predators will be easy to see that. But any animal, any living thing can become albino. That's a mutation. Something went wrong. The other sad thing, guys, is sometimes that can get passed on to their offspring. And that's just something that you have to look out for. In other words, we're humans, we're sinful, it doesn't work perfectly. That's a result of the sin that's there. Okay, last but not least is the Human Genome Project. In 1990, a group of scientists set out to map all the genes that make up the human chromosome. A map of a full set of genes that makes up a species called its genome. So this is the Genome Project for humans. By 2003, so 13 years later, this team had charted more than 3 billion base pairs that make up more than 30,000 genes in the human DNA. So when you think about genes, what makes you you guys? Sometimes like, well, I have eye color and I have hair color, and there's over 30,000. That's not all of them, guys, and it took them over 13 years to do that. The computer screen display above shows part of the human DNA strand that has mapped during the Human Genome Project. Notice the different colors in the bands. Each of the 4 colors represents the 4 different bases, okay? Using the information learned through the Human Genome Project, scientists have found thousands of genes that cause diseases. They hope to use this information to gain a better understanding of how diseases are passed from parent to offspring. They also use the information to develop new treatments for diseases. Tools from this project have helped scientists map genomes of other species too. These studies can help us learn how to raise healthier crops and livestock. So guys, super cool. A few things I just want to point out with that. Obviously, scientists want to get down there. If we can get to the basic level of understanding your DNA, we can hopefully make medicines and stop some of these diseases. Everything they pointed out, I like. The scary thing about this, guys, is a lot of people push back on this and say, leave it alone, you're starting to play God. For instance, can I figure out in the DNA where it decides if the child is a boy or a girl? And then can I go in there and say, I want to have a child, but I want it to be a boy, or I want it to be a girl. Can I change that? I want my child to be 6'6". Can I go in there and mess with the genes and change that? I want my child to be left-handed. So we got to be careful, guys, because in the end, we got to let God be God. And if he wants you to have a girl, great, a boy, great. He wants it short, super, tall. Some of that you just got to let happen. And science has got to look out from, I think crossing the line where you're starting to play God, because it gets a little bit scary. And we are very close to doing that kind of stuff. There will be people who have a lot of money that'll say, we want to have a child of a certain gender. And so they'll make science do that. They'll take mom's eggs and dad's sperm and put it together until they find one that produces the gender that they want. The problem with that, guys, is what they've created is 10 little humans until they find the one they want. They stick that and plant it in mom, she becomes pregnant, and then they throw away the other microscopic humans. And so they call that science. We would call that murder. David says, as soon as I was conceived, I was sinful. I was a living thing. So that's the one warning about this. Obviously, a lot of good things can come about that, and that's just a fine line we have to play with everything. So many things in this world can be a blessing. We just have to make sure Satan doesn't use it on us as a curse and goes against God's will. All right, lesson 2 done for the day. You got your worksheet that goes along with it. Make sure you're using your notes to help you with it. Blessings.